Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I want to talk to you about false dichotomies. Alright, so what a false dichotomy is basically a polarity based in dualistic awareness. So things like up, down, big, small, creation, destruction, self and other, things like that have a practical use for us in reality but have no existential truth in and of themselves. So before I start talking about false dichotomies, I want to give just a little brief blurb about wisdom, just so that you understand what the importance is of looking into these false dichotomies and sort of debunking your false assumptions based on the illusions of duality. So what wisdom is it's not some kind of external thing that you read in a book or something that you learn out here. Wisdom is always at your disposal. It's in your internal experience all the time, and every bit of wisdom that you could ever need is always right there. It's just that our beliefs and our assumptions about things have a tendency to block those things down. They sort of work like a stopping block, or like something that sort of numbs you out to that wisdom. And so we've gone unconscious to most of our wisdom. And the way to become more conscious is to remove false assumptions, false beliefs, and any other thing that could obstruct the movement of wisdom into your conscious mind. So it sort of works like if you have a large object in a room, that clearly displaces some of the air in the room. You take the object out, the air naturally just sort of flows back in. Wisdom works the same way. And so this is why it's very important to look into false dichotomies. Alright, so if you're familiar with the concept of enlightenment, you'll probably have heard it referred to as non-dual awareness or non-duality consciousness. And what non-dual means is not two. So basically, the realization of enlightenment is that there is nothing separate from you. Everything is one thing. And so these dichotomies that we use to interface with reality, they may have some kind of practical truth to them where you can use them and they're convenient, but they don't have any existential truth to them. They will actually stand in the way of you seeking enlightenment and realizing your own enlightenment. And so in order that we might remove those blockages to wisdom and blockages to enlightenment, it's important that we understand that everything is one thing, and so a dichotomy must necessarily be false. Now, when I say that it is false, I don't mean that it has no practical truth. Some aspects of duality actually have great practical truth, and that's why it's so difficult. So instead of thinking about things in two ways, like truth and non-truth, I recommend let's look at it in three ways. So we have the existential truth. That's the truth that you realize when you become enlightened. That is the ultimate truth. But in the illusion of Maya, in the illusion of dualistic awareness, we have truth, practical truth, and non-truth. So practical truth would be things like, my name is Emerald. Now, if you're familiar with the concept of enlightenment, you'll know that there is no me to be Emerald. But on a practical level, yeah, sure, I'm Emerald. That's the practical truth. Now, an example of a falsehood would be, I'm Bob. I'm definitely not Bob in any sense. So, unless you're thinking from the existential thing that I'm everything, and of course I'm every single Bob that ever existed ever. So basically you want to make those distinctions. So when we're looking at these false dichotomies, it'll help sort of immerse us into what our unconscious beliefs are. You see, our web of beliefs is very, very complex, and it's something that we've been spinning our whole entire life. And so many of our beliefs we hold unconsciously, we just take them for granted. And so when we look at false dichotomies and we dig into these concepts, we can start sort of digging into the wiring of our beliefs and start chucking out things that are not true so that we can see what's true up underneath those beliefs. Alright, so the first false dichotomy that I want to talk about is maybe one that you've considered yourself. It's a pretty common one to look at. I think oftentimes maybe children even start to notice this one. So one false dichotomy is big and small. So for our practical awareness, of course, we could say that, oh yeah, an ant is small, an elephant is big, because an ant is small compared to us, an elephant is big compared to us. But when it comes to anything, in any kind of existential sense, you find that big and small is really just a relative distinction. And it's even quite miraculous that there's any kind of absoluteness to mass, because things can get cosmically huge and also like minutely small. And in fact, we don't even know how big the biggest thing is, or if there is a biggest thing, or if there's a smallest thing. And so all of this is a relativistic truth. So an ant, though small to us, could be huge to a germ, so there's no actual real existential truth to the terms big and small, even though it has practical use for us in reality. However, if we buy into the illusion of big and small, what it can do is it can sort of make us disillusioned and to believe that the world is more finite than it is, or reality is more finite than it is. So if you really look at this distinction between big and small, it really opens your mind up to the possibility that reality is infinite. All right, number 2, the next false dichotomy is up and down. So if you think about it, this is something that we use to interface with reality. We need the concept of up and down. We need to feel like there's an up and down to our world. But if we look out a little bit further and let's say we're able to go out of Earth's atmosphere, we would find that up and down isn't a constant. In fact, any directionality that we think of as being up, down, left, right, east, west, any of that has to be based on a particular object and a particular orientation to that object. But even if we look in our sensory experiences, we find that there's not really a direction anywhere. So if we look at our visual field, it's basically a flat plane of shapes imbued with colors, and there's no real way to tell which direction it's actually facing in. Now, we're used to interfacing with it as thinking, oh, this is me. But if we take away that thought, this is me right here standing upright, potentially our visual field could be tilted on its side or in any direction. Also, if we look at our sensory experience, our tactile experience, we'll find that if we really get focused, these sensations don't have any directionality of their own. There's no up and down relative to sensations. We're just used to understanding the world visually and then being able to relate it back to our senses. Or we are used to interfacing with the world in a particular way, and through that repetitive way that we interface with things, that makes us feel like there's some kind of directionality there. When there's only apparent directionality, there's no real directionality. So up and down is a false dichotomy. Also, another similar one is the false dichotomy of near and far. So we often think about, like, if we're looking at a road that stretches off far into the distance, we think, oh, that's really far away. But again, if we're looking at our direct experience of things, we find that the visual plane is still just a flat plane of shapes imbued with colors. It's all 100% flat, doesn't have any depth in and of itself. And the only thing that gives us the illusion of depth is that we're used to interfacing with that in a tactile, sensory kind of way. But as I said before, that has no direction either, so it's just repetitive action, and our thoughts about the situation and our impressions about the situation that make things seem like they have depth. So that's the only way to have depth, for there to be a near and far. So if you really explore spaciousness, you find there is no near and no far. And in fact, there is existentially no perceiver to be closer or further away from anything within the visual field or the sensory field. All right, number 4, new and old. What new and old is a relative thing to refer to the age of something that's been created recently if it's new, or created a long time ago if it's old. So it's a relative term, but if you think about it, all of the atoms and all of the particles that make up something new versus something that makes up something old, they're all the same atoms and particles. It's always been the same things. And even time itself is a false concept, so it's really all just occurring in one singular moment. And so nothing can be any newer or any older than anything else. This is an illusion, a practical illusion based in duality, because if you take the cells in my body versus the cells in somebody's body who's 86 years old, of course the 86-year-old is going to be seen as older, but the cells in our body are all ancient, Basically, we come from the earth, And the Earth comes from stars, and stars are billions and billions and billions and infinite billions of years old, and who knows what that comes from. So essentially, we could maybe make the assumption that all of that matter is infinite and everything that happens here is infinite, but also still recurring in one singular moment, paradoxically. But there's nothing here that could be older or newer than anything else. All right, number 5, creation and destruction. So this one's an interesting one to look at. We tend to think that, oh yeah, we can create things and we can destroy things. But of course, science tells us that matter is neither created nor destroyed. But then it also begs the question, where did all this come from if it was never created and it can't be destroyed? Where is all this happening from? And are we expanding somehow? Are new things being created? But the reality of the matter is that this is an illusion. Human beings need to think of things as having a beginning and an end, but nothing in reality actually has a beginning or an end. That's just a human concept. Reality is most likely quite infinite and doesn't have any beginning and end points. It doesn't make sense. Nothing else in nature is like that. It's just state changes from one thing to another. So the atoms from the soil become the atoms of the plant, and then it gets burnt, and then it goes up into the air and it gets breathed into someone's lungs, and just this whole cycle goes on of matter just changing forms, changing states. But nothing is ever lost and nothing is ever created. All right, so the next false dichotomy is life and death. So if you think about how someone comes into being, when the sperm fertilizes the egg and then the cells start to multiply and 9 months later out comes a baby, if you think about it, all of that was derived from the food that the mother was eating, basically structured around a certain type of DNA. And then, all of these various organ systems were created, and there's like this interplay between those organ systems to create a being that can move, that can eat, that can think. And then there's a consciousness to that being too. But ultimately, all of these things are just a collection of processes happening at once. And so even now, I'm just a collection of processes happening. A baby being born is just a collection of processes. All of nature could be really boiled down to that. So if that's what life is these collection of processes coming together, what death is basically one or more parts of those processes coming to a halt, and then basically the consciousness leaving that body. But ultimately there's nothing really lost, because if we are aware that consciousness itself is infinite, that can't be lost. And so whenever the body dies, nothing is really lost. It all just changes state, just like creation and destruction. Nothing is ever created, nothing is ever destroyed. Everything that is has always been and always will be. And it all happens right now. Also, because there's no separate self to actually die, and that we are just this collection of processes that happens to be taken in by a consciousness of sorts, there's no self there to die. All right, the next false dichotomy is internal and external. So if we become aware of exactly what's happening right now for us in the present moment, we find that we have our 5 senses occurring, and then we also have our thoughts occurring. So anything that isn't happening within the field of the 5 senses and isn't happening within the thought realm, all of that is a belief. And beliefs are necessarily not true because they're based in the illusion of duality. So when we look at internal and external, if we look in our first-hand experience, there's nothing internal to our experience and there's nothing external to our experience. It's all just an experience. So if we look around ourselves in our visual plane, there's just a visual plane there. There's no internal visual plane and there's no external visual plane. If we look at our thoughts, we might think, well, yeah, that's happening within my internal experience. That's not external to me. But what you'll find is that your thoughts don't actually have any location in space. We kind of assume that they come from the head, but that's an assumption. And in fact, unless you're looking in the mirror, your head doesn't exist for you in the present moment right now. It's not in any way that you're sensing it. Maybe you see the tops of your cheeks and your nose if you're looking at your visual field, But notice that that doesn't have any separation from the visual field itself. So think about it this way. There's nothing that's happened in your experience that has not been internal to you, even on the scientific level. If you think about it, your brain is processing sensory information that's being picked up from the environment. So you've never experienced the thing itself, you've only experienced your experience of it. And let's look at it from a scientific perspective. But from the first-hand subjective perspective, there is no internal and external. There's nothing external to your experience, and therefore there can't be anything internal either because it doesn't have external to contrast with it. So internal and external is an illusion of duality. All right, the next one is actually one of my favorites to think about, and that's the distinction between natural and unnatural. So we as human beings, we tend to think that somehow human beings are some loophole, some exception to nature, where we can do all these unnatural things like creating cars and buildings and atom bombs and pollution and all kinds of other stuff like that. Like we're somehow going against nature by doing that. But the thing is, you can't really actually go against nature because you are nature itself. What you do is what is, and what is nature. All right, number 9. Pleasure and pain. So if we think about how we experience pleasure and how we experience pain, we experience them as a mix of like physical sensations and then physical emotional sensations, which also occur in the body, and then also our thoughts about the situation. And so if we're experiencing pleasure, maybe we might get that like tingling sensation, and maybe we're thinking pleasant thoughts and it makes pleasant emotions come up. Or if we're experiencing pain, we experience painful body sensations, and then we have painful emotions come up, and then we feel the pain. And so basically, if we look at the body sensations that come along with that, essentially, body sensations don't actually harm you or hurt you. They're just things that kind of flow through your field of awareness. And so a pleasurable sensation could be interpreted as a painful sensation if you apply different thoughts to it. Or a painful situation could be interpreted as a pleasurable sensation if you apply certain thoughts to it. Like there was an example that I read in a book recently, I forget which one it was, but basically there were soldiers in World War I who were very, very proud to be soldiers there. And they had gotten trench foot, and many of them had to have their legs amputated, but many of them couldn't do so with anesthesia, but because they knew that they would go home and be seen as a hero because they got the wound, they experienced less pain and they were able to take it better. And so really your mindset relative to what's pleasure and what's pain really does impact the sensation itself, or at least how the sensation is taken in by you, because essentially all sensations are just sensations. So pain is like a flowing sensation, pleasure is maybe like a tingling sensation, but they're really all on the same level. We just interpret them differently. But of course, with pleasure and pain, we are wired to register pain as something that we should recoil from, and pleasure for something that we should go for because it's good for our survival. So it's one of those things that you can override that, but the main thing is to recognize that it is still part of the illusion of duality, and that any sensation is absolutely equal to any other sensation in the existential sense. Not in the practical sense, but existentially. All right, and number 10, significant and insignificant. And I think that this is one that I've struggled with a lot in the past, and I think a lot of other people do too. So this one I think is responsible for creating a lot of existential crises, because we have a tendency to go through our daily life and we tend to label things as, oh, this is worthwhile, this is not worthwhile, this is meaningful, this is meaningless, this is significant, this is insignificant, this has a purpose, this has no purpose. And for us, this is a very practical, useful thing. And it's our way of sort of creating a hierarchy and a prioritization of what's important to us and what's not. Very good, practical thing to have. But basically, when we start to look for the meaning of life, or when we start to ask ourselves existential questions, what we find is that there's no significance that we can find that we can apply to ourselves, to our lives, or to anything else in reality. And then it all seems sort of like a cruel joke sometimes. So a lot of times, trying to look for this significance, and then necessarily you find none because significance is an illusion, it's not real. And so a lot of people get really down in the dumps and they're like, wow, my life is completely pointless. It's completely insignificant. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. There's no point in my life. And yes, that's absolutely true. There's no significance, meaning, purpose, point, any of that. But that shouldn't be cause for sadness. Ultimately, what that is that showing that you're graduating up out of the illusion of duality. You know, you're starting to see that significance isn't real. Not that you're specifically insignificant. That's an idea that's not even real. You can't be significant or insignificant. It's just significance itself is just a measuring tool of the human brain. And it cannot wrap itself around the majesty that is your life, that is this reality. And so it's actually quite a beautiful thing to be able to transcend that illusion that there could be something that's significant or something that's insignificant. So when we become in touch with the fact that, you know, there's no meaning or meaninglessness, no significance or insignificance, no purpose and no purposelessness, and that there's no point to any of it, but no non-point to any of it either. You know, when we realize that those ideas are, you know, just ideas, we can leave behind the ideas and we can fully immerse ourselves in whatever's going on here. We can actually be with reality without having to size it up, without having to measure it out, without things having to make sense or to fit. You know, we can just be. You know, sort of like how a child goes onto a playground and they just want to play. You know, they don't want to have any reason. Like, they're not trying to think, what's the reason why I should play? You know, it's just a child's nature to play. And in that, it's just our nature to live and to want to expand and to want to grow. And even if it's like a mandala completely erased at the end of life, then that's okay, because this is an experience, and it's an important experience, and it's an experience of expansion and of growth. And it doesn't matter what the end product is. It's a process-oriented thing. All right, so those are 10 common false dichotomies, 10 common illusions of duality. These, again, are very, very important to look into, and I recommend doing even further inquiry down into these ideas so you can really start pulling the stuffing out of your worldview. You know, that's the way that you can get that wisdom to flow naturally into you and to be able to basically be ripe for insights to hit you and potentially even the realization of enlightenment. Let's cross our fingers. Alright, so that's all I have for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and click the like button and subscribe. If you're interested in similar topics like this, like seeking enlightenment or, you know, understanding your own nature, anything that has to do with self-knowledge, psychology, you know, various spiritual maps, anything like that, you're definitely going to want to subscribe to this channel because I got a lot more coming. I'm doing one upload a week now on Saturdays, so definitely tune in Saturday mornings for my videos. Also, feel free to check out thediamondnet.org. I'm going to start posting in my blog again. I kind of got a little bit, I was slacking a bit for a long time with that, but I'm going to get back into it. It'll basically be my reflections from throughout the week and, you know, things that I've been thinking about just on a more personal level that might not make it into my videos. But other than that, that's all I have. And I hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time, keep becoming more you.